All right, welcome everyone at the next multi-network community sync. Today is May 7th. I see we have two topics today even. I want to talk about the device selector. I think I tried it, the array finally myself, and I saw light, something that I think Lionel was already mentioning back a few months back when he was kind of commenting in my dog that we should have this. I think we did had discussion about this back in the days as well. So I want to touch on this, and then yeah, Lionel added stuff on the status. Okay, so let's start with that. So to give you some context, our current idea of what pod network would hold was for it to only, I think this picture is pretty good, hold the VAS class name and the some configuration for the driver. And then I was thinking to device class to hold all the information, whatever else the driver will need in terms of like selection of devices, which is not ideal when I kind of tried out myself, and something that, as I mentioned, Lionel have been pointing out before. It's because, and I probably I want to present this via an example. And let me maybe do that because that's gonna be I'm gonna leverage this picture because I think example is, I was thinking of how to kind of talk about this, but I think example will be the best way to go. So basically, an example I want to talk about, I'm maybe just gonna shelve this on the side for a bit. And example I want to talk about is a simple VLAN, right? If I want to have a parameterized driver for VLAN network, and what will that be? So VLAN, and what will be the inputs it will have to have? It will have to have the ID of the VLAN as inputs. And the other thing it will have to have an input is the parent interface. So basically, parent interface, or sometimes it's called master interface on the nodes, but basically the interface via which I want to VLAN. And I am assuming here we are leveraging the Linux-based VLAN, not the not directly some SROV or something, but here just want to kind of simplify that. But just want to kind of create the VLAN, Linux VLAN interface with specific ID, and add my pod interfaces on top of that. So basically, virtual interfaces that further on is going to be used by the pods themselves, right? So two inputs I can see that's needed is the ID and then the parent interface. So if I have those two inputs, what I was thinking in initial kind of approach that, let me copy, where are you? What will that mean if I were to have such a type of driver in the array in our current approach? What will that mean, right? If I were to do the VLAN pod network now, and let's say pod network has to be explicit VLAN, right? So I would say VLAN 10, for example, right? That will be my pod network that the end user is gonna use. And then in my provider spec config, yes, I can provide my VLAN ID, which will be 10 here, right? So that it configures, and then the driver knows it has to create the 10 VLAN and then do stuff off of that. But then where do I provide the parent data? And why this is important? This is important on which parent I want to use, because the parent will dictate, when you think about this, where or which nodes and that can be different, usually can be various on how you're set up, how your kind of environment is set up. But usually what you would probably want to do to the parent or any other maybe means to identify where this network can exist. Because, for example, my cluster isn't uniform, and I have some node pools that that have specific interfaces on which I have the VLAN enabled, and on some I don't, right? And how do I select that, right? This is where basically we do want to leverage the array to have the ability to the driver to specify, you know what, only those set of nodes have the VLAN availability and the others don't. But then if I don't have a selector in the pod network, the only way the selector can exist is in device class, right? And then I think question then makes maybe as well on what is the class specified as, right? Because this is another thing that I probably have to, unless maybe someone has that answer, but I think that's a question to DRA folks on what is the nature of the class, and maybe this is where what we can treat it as and what can it be. But let's assume the class is VLAN class. This is what, because I am going to implement multiple types of, my drivers can implement multiple types of kind of piping of the interface. And in this case, I want to say this, I'm going to have multiple classes, one VLAN, the other one's going to be maybe something else, maybe some device type or SROV type where it's not done via Linux kernel, but something else. So let's say this says VLAN Linux, right? And then my pod network uses that. And I can have another one that's called VLAN SROV, right? For example. So that's how I want to kind of divide and slice it. Then in OpExtract, I don't want to make the configuration of what VLAN ID is here because I want to have multiple of those, right? I want to kind of, this is a parent for those, right? So this is a parent kind of master configuration that the driver provided, right? So I'm supporting VLAN Linux with some configuration, and I can have multiple of those, right? And not this. So I can have multiple of those with different VLAN IDs, right? And to kind of do whatever I want, right? So that's kind of the point of the class. And basically the class kind of defines the standardized configuration. And the problem here might arise if I want to differentiate what is the parent for each of the VLANs, right? Because it might be different per cluster. Considering the class is something that I'm pre-configuring and providing with my driver implementation, because I specified VLAN. This is the set of classes that I am supporting as the driver, and one of them is VLAN Linux, and I don't know what sort of interface a specific cluster is using, or what is the parent, let's call it parent interface selector, right? This is something that is not part of the class because the provider provides this, right? The class itself. And this makes it kind of rigid where in the current approach, I would have to do that here because the selector is here, right? Device class has a selector and I tried it out. So you could do that, I think this is device selector or something like that, device, and there is a selector space. And you could do stuff here with class, but then what would have to happen is a class will be not device Linux, but it will be device Linux parent X, right? So kind of not ideal because then that means the class is one-to-one to a specific pod network. And this is where, and maybe additionally where this is important in terms of selector, because this is later used to that other notion I mentioned about the node pool selectivity, right? I have, let me draw that up as well, where I can have multiple nodes and my driver will tell which node. This is node 1, and there's another node, and what might be one more, right? So I have node 1, node 2, and node 3. And let's say only this one. So there is a object called resource slice coming from the array. So resource slice says this one has parent for 10, right? Let's say that, right? This one says that this has it, but it might not be true for the other nodes, right? Let me do it this. And unfortunately, if we were to keep to what we have it here, like through the device class, yes, it is a possible, but then what we are making a rigid connectivity between the device class and pod network, it's one-to-one rather than one-to-many. So to remove that rigidity and give the ability to kind of dynamically select and leverage the selector, let's say this one has a 10. I think we will need the ability to do a selection as well in the pod network or in the kind of follow up, because going back to our pod network is being translated to a resource claim template, which basically should have all those data. Did I explain it, or did I lost everyone at some point? Please ask questions or
just the selector doesn't necessarily has to be in the device class. It can be in the resource claim also.
no, that's perfectly fine, right? But this is in the approach that you yourself create the resource claim template, right, Lionel? What you're calling out, and then okay, and at that point, this pod network has only the label, right? This is the other approach we were talking, where pod network only uses a what you're calling out is the namespace, right? And then yes, you point out to the namespaces that the claim has, and then yeah, and then the template can have everything, right? But I'm thinking about the automated mode. And if someone's not aware, I think there is a draft that the top of the status meeting has a draft of the initial pod network design. What we are thinking is that we would like to auto create pod networks we would like to auto create resource claim templates out of pod networks, right? So basically, this is the picture on the right here that I keep borrowing from. What does it mean, right? So pod network, from this we are creating the template, right, and how the kind of pieces come together, right?
And in our current design, is device class something which is already pre-installed by some device?
Yeah, device provides that. Yeah, that's kind of the assumption, that device class is something that the driver provides, right? What sort of classes do you provide? If your class doesn't provide anything, you can just provide a blank device class with any additional specification.
Got it.
That's per API, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, I think
So
that's
yeah,
correct.
go ahead.
Sorry, Macha, go ahead. But at least for myself, I think I somehow didn't understand some of the bits. So at least for me, it would be helpful if you could repeat some of the challenges. I don't know if.
So I think is the challenge, main challenge would be to preserve the device class one-to-many capability. If I were to, and let's assume that VLAN, each separate VLAN represents different VLAN. Each separate parent interface is needed for different VLAN. And let's assume we have that configured, or maybe not always the case. Usually you're going to have one interface that's trunked and you can have multiple VLANs on it. But let's say I need to have that flexibility to change that parent interface, right? For a different VLAN, right? So let's say I have my node 1 and node 3 have the parent interface for 10, but but node 2 doesn't. It has a parent only for 11, right? With the current approach, I would have to do this. I would have to do basically create 2 separate classes, which basically I would have to make a copy paste them myself. So I would have to create one for parent 10 and the other one for parent 11, so that I can leverage the selector specified in the class, right? And then the connection will be one-to-one, right? I have VLAN 10, and let's say this one will be VLAN 11. And basically there is no one-to-many, it will always be one-to-one only, right? Which I think that's not the point of the class, right? The class should be shared by multiple, and it should provide some high-level specification of the kind of capabilities the driver has, right?
Uh,
So
so I'm thinking if for some reason there's a one-to-one mapping between a pod network and a device class, is that somehow representing that it is the device class itself which is defining
yeah,
the boundary of the network?
that's exactly then there is then there is that conclusion as well, right? And
More
that's
or
a fair
less.
point as well, Gaurav, right? But assuming the driver, the class will be provided by the driver is not aware about your parent interface selector, right? This is something specific for your cluster, your environment, right? So that's not something that the driver provider can give you or predict what it's gonna be, right? So this is where this doesn't fully work, right? Because then what would have to happen is the driver doesn't provide you the classes, and basically only provides you how to create the classes, what sort of parameters you can have to have the classes. And that's another thing what you're saying, calling out as well, right? When the class kind of defines that in high level, and yeah, but and then the pod network is just because that's a fair point, Gaurav, and thank you for bringing that point out. That then we might make me to rethink of what the pod network is. Maybe pod network is then just a pointer to what we initially approached, like with this one, right? Pod network is always a pointer only, and maybe not with a namespace selector, but with something via something else to a either device class or even the resource claim template already, right? Where we have all the blows and whistles. And to kind of remind when we discussed about this last time, we were against putting the selector in the pod network because then pod network starts to become basically we are copy pasting the template. There was that argument made last time we talked about this, and that's why we kind of discarded that. But I now see that I think the current state is not sufficient to what we want to achieve, right? To what some of the use cases that we'd like to achieve, or at least I'm thinking of, the pod network in the current state might not be enough. And basically what's going to happen is we are going to always use the namespace selector where we're going to use the template. And this is what probably Lionel, you're always thinking anyway, right? To use to kind of have the template being the front end and the pod network being just a side pointer via which we would integrate the other capabilities, serviceability, or what's not. Because that's something that I think maybe we should pursue and go towards that idea. Any thoughts on that? Because right now we are making the pod network front and center, trying to make that as a abstraction for the array, right? User doesn't know about the array. We said the name sameness is the key here, right? So pod network creates the same name of template, which then pod references via the array aspect, right? And this is the only aspect for the user, and touch with the array is here, right, through the resource and the name here specified. resource claim template name here. User doesn't know about any of the kind of DRA aspects. They only interact with pod network. And is that the right thing to do, considering with all the kind of, we are copying most of the fields to the pod network anyway? And maybe we should maybe just focus on the DRA itself as a specification driver, and then pod network is just a pointer to some of them, and we will have to figure out how that trickles down later on to some of the drivers, and this is where maybe some specification will have to be made to do that. And then pod network is just for the kind of grouping of the claim templates or what's not, to kind of identify the pod network, to which initially I just want to make it as a common configurator to kind of identify those pods are connected to the specific pod network, and later on to leverage this for our serviceability, network policies, and any other Kubernetes primitives.
What we could do, maybe,
Uh-huh.
I think I proposed this before, but it's to have the pod network object. We have an opaque parameter inside. So the controller of this pod network will recognize this parameter because it implements them, and then it creates automatically the resource claim template. So each implementation of the pod network has to create the resource claim template itself. It's not our community here that is creating this controller. And this controller will also fill some selector in the pod network status that will say this resource claim belongs, or every resource claim, or every pod that points to this resource claim template will belong to the network.
I'm not sure so
there's two parts in what I said. There's the configuration part that
right. So we still we still have this opaque part. Is that correct?
Right, but it's not related to DRA. It's a opaque parameter that your pod network controller will have to understand, and that will transform it into a resource claim template.
But the question for you is that standardized, or are we saying this is and who owns the controller?
The implementation of the pod network.
Oh, okay. All right.
So this is the configuration part. The resource claim is being created, and at that time, the controller, the pod network controller, has to report in the status of the pod network how to identify which pod belongs to this pod network.
Oh, okay. So basically via some means, and that part would have to be standardized. I assume, Lion.
A selector.
Yeah, but basically this has to be standardized. So because you mean what you know what I mean?
I'm not sure if I get what you mean by.
All right. Okay. Let's.
I'm guessing what you mean is that this method that you're describing needs to be standardized. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean the status would have to be standardized. And let me maybe is that gonna pass?
So a quick question even before that. At least in the current proposal, pod network is something which is implemented by core Kubernetes, right?
Right.
And this would be a drastic shift towards a different thing if we say pod network is implementation specific, right?
Not exactly, right?
Not
we
exactly.
defined the API. This is where I'm trying to. That's where my question is, right?
Okay.
So, because we would specify and that's fair point. The burden on our side is lessened, right? I agree with you on that. So we have. Oh, I need that. Let me just copy that because I may. So what I needed here is this. So I still have the OPEC piece in the spec. So pod network spec, right? I have this, and then I have status. And basically what you're saying, Lionel, the spec is whatever you wish it to be, and you provide the controller for that spec.
Right.
Right. And this can be core because we can use still the OPEC structure, right? So however your internals of the OPEC struct is, it's up to you, and you have the whole free will to and full flexibility to do whatever you need. But then
just to mention about this OPEC structure is that if we identify that multiple implementation have the same field, then we can merge them and then make them as part of the spec.
As part of the core, right? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like you were mentioning enable, for example.
Yeah, and for example, enabled, right? Yeah, exactly. If
then,
we...
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, I was talking about the status after.
Yeah, and then the status, right? So the status, what will be that, right? Oh, sorry, that's too bad. So the status of this, what will that be, right? And I see you saying a pod or resource claim selector, because we care about, in this case of today, we care about the resource claims, right? In terms of if I were to select, because why would I care about this? To kind of identify the backends, right, for this.
So you can say it's a cell expression that will select pods that points to a type of resource claim with this interface name or something like that. Something, I don't know, maybe it's too complex. But I mean, we are just throwing ideas.
Yeah. Selector for pod status or something like that, right? Pod or resource claim. And
like you can say,
yeah,
all the pod with this label that are pointing to a resource claim with this label that contains this interface name in the device status.
But this is where I want to sure that that's the case. They should be standardized, Lionel, right? This is what we are thinking, right? This piece would have to be standardized. This is where we would say, yeah, here in the spec you can do whatever, but in status, this is the standard. Your return is of this type, because we're gonna define the pod network, right? And then the status says, okay, this is the set of resource claims that or pods or whatever we're gonna define on, that's gonna return you those the endpoints for this network. Keep in mind that we have to take into account, so if you think pods are going to have multiple interfaces or resource claims attached to it. And then even then a resource claim can have multiple stuff listed in it, right? So you have to slice and dice both ways. It's a multiple resources and each resource can have multiple devices. So you have to kind of, select all that's here, right? So pod is maybe the best way to go, because then you can find all the resource claims that attach to the pod, and then you filter them out by something, because you still have to do that, right?
It's a selector that points at the end to a status of the device in the resource claim.
Exactly, right. That's the point, right? So how will we do that part? How do we align? Because that's a fair point. So I have because I looked at some of that as well with what you with the status that you're going to talk about in next topic, where I have my let me see, what do I want to have? Let me have resource claim pod X and some hash, right? And it will going to have so this has gonna have a spec with some driver devices and what's not, right? Devices, and there will be somewhere driver spelled out, and there will be a status as well here, which, if I'm not mistaken, that it's in devices, right? Devices, No, not in devices. What was
Yeah,
that?
devices.
It is in devices.
I mean, it's more or less this, yes.
Yeah, and this is a list that has that links to, it has name, pool, and driver. And then, because what I'm getting at is, how do I link? Because I can have multiple of those, right? And some of them will have the network data. I'm not sure how that's called, but I think more along those lines. But I can have multiple of those devices, right?
Mhm.
And not to mention, I can have multiple resource claims as well, if linked to a single pod. How do I know that this specific one of those is for that pod network, right? How do I link those?
Yeah, I
Keep in
mean,
mind
that's why
that
I mentioned the set expression in this status.
no, that's fine. Even if you have the cell expression, that doesn't help, because cell expression is going to, oh, you're saying cell expression that uh, what even then? What sort of cell expression that would that be? Because
I think it
so
would.
then that has to be hooked on the resource claim, right? It cannot be pod, because pod will have too many, right? So it has to be resource claim, right? Today, at
Right,
least.
but you could say something like the pods that is attached to this resource claim should have this kind of label or this kind of characteristics. And then the resource claim should also have these characteristics, including one of the device that has this network data with, I don't know, in this IP range or something like that.
This must be more explicit. Like, it has to be more explicit in terms of like the name of the pod network or something, right? So you see, I'm gonna have here a data plane
Yeah,
net
it's,
pod network, right? So this has to be explicitly said, and not to mention there can be a driver. Does it call out? Does this call out the? Let me see. Devices conditions data. Device. There is data in the device. Okay, maybe we can leverage that. That field data. The data field has some stuff where you can probably put some. Let me quickly see on the API spec. Oh, did that come down? Or maybe look at. Hmm. Okay, so that will be something along those lines where this would select maybe on something in the resource claim. I think there's another field called data here. Maybe I'm not sure what is the type of this. Is that opaque?
yes,
It
this is opaque.
seems okay.
Okay, so basically here I can have my here my driver can provide some data. Your implementation must provide here a pod network link or something, right? I think maybe you don't have to, but that will be the recommended way to do it, because you can do it otherwise. But some sort of pod network link to say, and then you select that in the status, right? Okay,
Yeah,
that could
yeah, you can do
work,
that.
right? Thoughts? I know this is, I don't think it's a big of a change. Is simplification of what we initially kind of planned and thought of. Except for, yeah, exactly, simplification, because we are giving more power to the implementations, and the question is that too much power or too much burden, I would say, this at that point, on the implementations to have this to kind of do that kind of stuff, or not? Any other thoughts? We haven't
Um,
went far with the pod network itself, so I don't mind changing things.
the the like funny part, I would say, is that if the status is very generic, like the selector, you
Mhm.
don't really need to use the array behind.
What do you mean?
For example, if you would be able to select on the annotation, you could
Oh,
potentially
here.
select
Oh, that's a
Multus
fair point.
annotation.
So you could select Multus annotation. That's a fair point. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder whether the cell can do that.
I have no idea, but I'm
Yeah.
just throwing some ideas.
Yeah, sure. But that's a fair point. Yeah, because then we still use the OPEC struct type here to kind of, you go ahead and do whatever you want here. And then down here, it's that part and how you implement this. Yeah. So I think something to I think digest through. Let's maybe sleep on this and let's get back to next week on how we want to take this further on. I don't mind changing because I see gaps in my previous ideas, and then it is missing, and we are just keep adding other fields and what's not. So it's almost becoming a template. So I'm kind of doubting on, yeah, why we would even do that and complicate our life like this. Um,
I kind of agree. Yes, I think if one of our initial goals was that perhaps pod network is something which is simple to use, and if we are saying it's
mm.
becoming more and more complex to use, then maybe
Yeah, that is,
rethink that.
it's losing its validity. Exactly. Uh,
So Mache, on another, I'm guessing you people may have already thought of it, but why can't like something like a device class represent, or using a device class, you can say I want these particular devices to be part of this device class. Basically, a device
yeah.
class defines a set of devices that are included in that device class, and somehow those devices themselves form a network. Like, is how bad is that assumption? Like using a device class
No,
with
that's not a bad, Gaurav. This is, so that's an approach as well. I think even internally what we discussed, we still need a pod network representation. I think we the handle is something that we do need, right? I would not want to make that handle to be a DRA device class. All right,
but
because
why exactly is that? Why do we think that way?
then which device class do I point to, right? And then not to mention, think about that. If I were to now engage the gateway API, oh, folks, you know what? Can you point to a device class? What does that mean if the device class points to a GPUs? What's the point of the gateway API for GPUs? You
So
see,
yeah, I totally see that point. Yes, that's a totally valid point. But then I'm also thinking that, for example,
mhm,
we were able to kind of add more network specific data to the status for the resource claim, right? So
huh?
perhaps that also means that maybe we can also specialize a device class in some sense to say, hey, this is a special kind of device class which is supposed to represent like just a network, something like that. I mean, something that needs to be obviously discussed, but I'm just throwing out ideas right now. I don't have
Sure.
concrete.
No, that's fine. So I think this is where my problem with this is you still point to a kind device class, which can be something else. And then you have to make a conditional thingy where it says, oh, you can only point to device class that additionally has something.
Yes,
You
yes.
see that's the problem. So I have to read all of them and assume they are of the right kind, rather than just them pointing directly to the right kind. I think
So yeah,
this is where then it's kind of UX, and if someone has some different opinion, I would say UX will be better if we point to a specific kind rather than a specific mode of a kind.
gotcha. Yeah, that's a valid point.
That's what I would make a case for. I would not want to point to a generic object to kind of then slightly modify it and give it some sort of flavor to be the network representation, because then we are not becoming the first class citizen in the Kubernetes. We are again becoming some just annotation, which we don't want to. We want to have a first class citizens for network, right? And then have a proper notion of that, that I can point to a specific pod network, right? I think that's the that was the ultimate goal of this effort of this community, to have that network representation in the API, right? And whatever in whatever form it points us to what are or how I group the interfaces, right?
Got it. Got it.
All right. I think let's think of this and see what anything else. Let's try to think about this and maybe some poke other holes on this and see where we can get with that. I think this is somehow valid, considering this kind of my rant before about the VLAN example and the current pod network not fully satisfying the requirements, and then it's just becoming a template, right? Because we're gonna add more fields to it. That's kind of annoying. All right, Lionel. If there are no other any other questions to this topic, if not, then yeah, go ahead, Lionel.
Yes, thanks. My topic is very short.
Okay.
This morning there was the working group device management meeting, and it has been mentioned that this gap versus claim device status will still be in beta in the next release. So it's currently in beta in 1.33, and in next release it will be still in beta. I just wanted to mention this to make people aware about it.
Is that because everything is beta, or they don't want to? Why we don't want to qualify that? Do you know what is the reason?
I think the reason is just to give more time for people to think if this is the right way to go ahead with this, because currently the core DRA is in beta and then it will go in GA next release. So let's have one more release for the sub features, I would say.
Okay, fair. That's fair. This went beta in 33? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
It's in beta in 1.33, and it's enabled by default also. Gaurav, you have a comment?
Yes, I had a question. Like, how did this conversation start? Like, were there some concerns raised by someone about the API not being sufficient, or was this just a random thought that?
Or is that a global mandate on all the additional features, Lionel?
I think it's globally mandate requirements, I think.
For all the features, okay.
Yeah, for all the features. If you want an example or get some reason, you can open this document. You will see the reason is that there's almost 20 cap for DRA.
Oh, okay.
I see. Okay. But
so,
okay,
I think
sorry, this would still mean that, for example, if DRA goes GA in 134, the fields themselves would still be just enabled by default, right? It's just that we haven't classified them as G8, but they are still there to use. Like, nothing stopping people from using them at that point, right?
Exactly, yes.
Is that true, Lionel? Aren't the fields gated? You have a gate today, or you don't?
I have a FidoGate, but it's enabled by default in beta.
Oh, okay.
So the moment, yes, the moment DRA API itself goes kind of freely available, all the fields themselves like always become just there, out there.
Yeah, so that's kind of strange having, if they are enabled by default anyway.
But yeah, and otherwise it gives us some opportunity if we have more concern. If anyone here have any more concern or think that's not the right way to go with this cap, then we can still discuss about it.
No, it's we are not questioning that, Lionel.
No, but I mean, maybe some other people have concern.
Yeah, sure. I tried it as well, and I updated them, and I think that the three things it has, it's awesome. So the name, MAC VLAN, and MAC address, sorry, and IPs. it uses, it's right on spot, and basically what I think I can update it here because I played with it a bit. So network data, yeah, it has what? It has MAC, IP addresses, and this is a list of IPs, and it's a CIDR notation.
Mhm.
So that's awesome.
It has the interface name.
And then and there's anything else?
Interface name. I don't know if you wrote it.
Right, and interface. Yeah.
That's in the CAP, for example, just for people who are to be aware that what has been considered in the past, it was that it should be in the pod status instead, but that was the CAP multi-network.
Yeah.
And that's why we went to resource claim. But if anyone has any concern or anything that could be make this CAP improved, then please talk to me, or it would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. It's very standardized data, so I don't think, and those are all optional fields, right? So it's not like you have to fill all of them.
Yeah. But just for people to be aware, and thanks for your attention.
Yep, this is definitely going to be very useful. Again, thanks a lot, Lionel, for kind of driving this.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, folks. Let's kind of digest that kind of alternative approach for the pod network. Maybe we can think of yet another thing. I think the initial idea looks like the linkage is getting complicated. So I don't think that's why I think we need to rethink that part. Okay. Any other topics? Anyone? Going once, going twice. All right. Thanks, everyone. And let's continue that discussion on this one next week.
Thanks a lot. This was a great
hopefully
discussion.
close it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.